Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another episode of First Impressions, the video series where I discuss films that I have watched recently, either ones that are still in their theatrical run, or, as in the case of this week's film, ones that I have just watched recently, either that I've been meaning to see, or that I just watch randomly. Today, since it's a film from class, it is of the latter variety. Today's film is from 1977. It's a Japanese horror film directed and produced by, and forgive me if I mispronounce this name, Nobuhiko Obayashi. Obayashi, I think is the last name, right? It is, of course, House, or as it would be pronounced going by the Japanese spelling in English letters, Hausu. Now, apparently, Toho approached Obayashi to make this film like Jaws, and it's influenced by ideas from his daughter. And he developed ideas for a script that was written by Chiho Katsura. And this other little bit of tidbit about the background of the film is not stated on Wikipedia or at least on IMDb. I think it might be on Wikipedia. Okay, never mind. Part of this is in there, and that is that part of the inspiration for this film, believe it or not, was the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because apparently Obayashi was born in Hiroshima, and he lost a lot of his childhood friends in the bombing. So you can see why that would have a little bit of a strain on his childhood. And it's one element that I did not notice that was in the film at first. I mean, there's one random little part where we do see footage of a nuclear weapon, which I thought that I'm like, okay, that's a bit random, but since this isn't a World War II flashback for some backstory, it kind of made sense. But then with all this other stuff, it's like, okay, I'll bring this up again in a little bit, but that was there. And then other elements like the mirrors and all the stuff that seemed like it would be fears that children would have are actually ideas from his daughter. So it's a mixture of the two. And the film is so absurd at times with how over the top it portrays stuff that you look at this and go, are we sure this is a horror film? This seems to be playing off more like a comedy. Maybe it's the year it came out. Maybe it's the culture barrier or both. But that actually is also part of the nuclear theme here, apparently. Because apparently Obayashi approached it with the mindset that you got to take the horrors of real life, especially one that is so ridiculous from the onset, which with the nuclear weapon would be, it's ridiculous how powerful they are. And you make a film that basically is using elements of it be ridiculous. Now this is me restating what he said in his own words. If it's not exactly how he stated it or how the video that was on the DVD that we watched stated it, but that's the gist of it. If you want to actually see it in the original words, it's on the Criterion Collection DVD. I think you might be able to find it online. And when I upload this, if it's on YouTube, I'll put it in the description box. If not, then you're out of luck. Anyway, the plot of the film is that it takes place in then modern day, and we are introduced to a young girl nicknamed Gorgeous, which, by the way, most of the characters are actually go by nicknames here. We got Gorgeous, Fantasy, Melody, Kung Fu, Mac, Sweet, and that's their names basically that they go by. And the thing with it, apparently they're nicknamed this because of their main character attribute. Gorgeous, obviously gorgeous. Melody likes to play music. Kung Fu is into martial arts. Mac, she's basically the eater of the group, and the little running gag with her is that they say she's fat, but looking at her, she's not that fat, but maybe this is one of the culture things, Maybe for 1977 Japan, she was fat for a teenage girl, and she just looks fine to me. She's a bit chunkier than the rest of the females, but not too much where I would say she's fat. Sweet, don't remember hers. Fantasy, I think that's kind of obvious. She makes up stories a little bit. And Professor, because she's the smart one. Anyway, Gorgeous's father returns home from scoring some film in Italy, saying that they liked him better than Marconi. Little film humor there. And he surprises Gorgeous by announcing that he is getting married. Now, the way he announces it definitely says the culture difference right there, and that is he says, she will be your new mother, when introducing her to the woman that he brought home. And she's like, what? Now this upsets her because her mother had died a couple years earlier, and she's like, she kind of sees this as her trying to take her mother's place. Well, she writes a letter to her sister's mother. Her sister's... I got those words backwards, excuse me. Her mother's sister, if I can talk right. Forgive me, it's almost 10 o'clock as I'm recording this, so mistakes like that will be made. Because, he wants to see her that summer. Her aunt writes back and says, yes, you could come, and yes, you can bring your friends. We can have a grand old time. And they end up going to her mother, to the house that her mother and her aunt grew up in. And from the get-go, you could tell there's something very, very weird going on over here. First, the watermelon salesman that lives not far away from the house is a little creepy. Then when they get into the house, you can tell right away something is off. It's not set up ominous like how a Western movie would set up a house like this. So that, the year and the culture thing kind of make it a little different, but you can tell enough that there's something weird going on. And slowly things start to get weird. You can tell by the aunt's behavior. It's like, okay, she's a bit off, but, she's lived in this house for almost a decade by herself, so maybe that's it. And her backstory would make anyone a bit off. The cat starts to do some weird stuff, and they do mention a little rhyme about an older cat can open a door, but only a witch's cat can close a door. And there's actually a scene that actually happens, and you're like, yep, witch's cat. And then, of course, as the film goes on, as you would expect, the girls start to disappear one by one. And as this happens, all the girls are like, this is getting weird, we gotta call the cops and all that. And eventually when they start to see the supernatural stuff happen, you can imagine they're all gonna be freaking out. Some of it's like, okay, this is some Scooby-Doo stuff, and then other ones is like, okay, that is a little creepy. And maybe part of it is also the culture difference, but some of it didn't seem as spooky to me, because it came off to me more as a horror comedy. But like I said, it's part of that's intentional and part of it's culture based. But I can see why someone who grew up in Japan would find some of this stuff horrific. The scenes that I really liked for like tone and horror were the scenes with the aunt, where it actually is a little creepy. Like one that comes to mind is the scene where Gorgeous is looking in the mirror and she sees her aunt's reflection. That was a little creepy, because it's after this that Gorgeous seems to be possessed by the spirit of her aunt, but it never states within the film for certain whether her aunt has possessed her or she's taken her aunt's place. The ending is ambiguous, but the dialogue makes it more, at least for me, makes it seem more like the aunt possessed her. Now, speaking of the aunt, her backstory apparently is that around the time of World War II, she was engaged to this man. World War II happens, he's drafted, he dies during the war. She doesn't believe he's dead. She's waiting for him to return, so it's one of those tragic love things, like to steal a line from 47 Ronin. I will wait, I will search for you throughout thousands of lifetimes, basically. And that's what's happening, and apparently the aunt died, and she's still inhabiting the house. Now, the weird thing they only mention loosely once is it sounds like she's possessing her own dead body, but because of how she moves throughout the house, I'm more inclined to believe that she takes a physical form when interacting with the living, like the young women that came to the house. But for the most part, she's a non-physical form, which would explain a little bit more her connection with the cat. Which the cat thing is a little weird, because it was at Gorgeous's house, and then apparently when they come to the house, it's the aunt's cat. That was a little weird. Like, maybe it was her mother's cat. And her mother had it since she came home. That's just my guess. Cats can live for a while. It's a weird thing that they never fully explain. But that's just an idea I just am throwing out there right now. And the cat is connected with the whole nuclear weapon metaphor that's going on, because apparently the cat's name translates as snowflake. It's white with puffy fur, so there's some nuclear cloud metaphor going there. And of course, every time that the cat does something strange, right before it does it, its eyes glow. So there, the glowing isn't radiation. It's a green glow too. So it's like, okay, I never would have guessed that. And the absurdity carries over to a lot of the special effects. Some of them you could chalk up to it being Japanese cinema in the 70's. Other one, it's like, okay, that had to be an intentional choice. And it carries over with the director's theme. And with how the director approached this theme, as our professor pointed out, this is where one aspect of film, when it goes from the makers to the audience, one of the flips that happens is the what's more important, the director's intended vision or the way the audience interprets it. I think it's a little bit of both. Now, when the director approaches a film with a specific vision, and you can definitely see it on screen, okay, you gotta respect that. Now, if it's like very, very vague what they're going for, but you could still read it, and you interpret it a different way, for you, that'd be a little bit more important, because that's the way you took it. Now, if you find out what the director meant, that might impact a little bit your interpretation. Like, for me, watching this film, I got a little bit of that once we found out what the director was going with. I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of this stuff make a little bit more sense. Because I was thinking, okay, this film is a little weird. I'm not fully understanding what's going on here. Well, maybe it's all the culture thing. And then when I found out, I'm like, okay, a lot of this makes more sense. Some of it's still culture, but it definitely makes one thing at the very end make a lot more sense when the watermelon salesman just vanishes into a skeleton when the one teacher guy mentions bananas being his favorite fruit, and then the next day when another character shows up, the guy who likes bananas has turned into bananas in his car. It's like, okay, that's a little funny. And just the randomness of bananas was funny too. Bananas! Another interesting thing to mention is apparently when this film originally came out in Japan, it got a lot of negative reviews from critics, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't see why. With this film, it's one of those ones that, yeah, definitely people might not get it. It's definitely a like it or hate it film. Most people probably wouldn't like it. I mean, one of the students in my class even asked, is this considered a good film? And then when it was explained, he's like, okay. So that might have swayed his opinion just a little bit. But, I mean, I enjoyed it. I mean, I could see myself picking up the Criterion DVD of it one day down the road, if it's reasonably priced. And if I were to come across it randomly on TV, I'd probably watch it. Definitely one of those experience movies, not on the same level as like Holy Mountain, but definitely an experience. Just for the entertainment vibe of how over the top it is, but since it's handling that one subject matter and the director's viewpoint on it, you can get it. And from that, the cinematography is pretty good, and to use a term we learned in class, its mise en scène is very excellently executed. For those of you who don't know what that term means, mise en scène is basically everything that's placed in front of the camera. The acting, the actors, the props, the set, the lighting, even the film is technically part of mise en scène. And all of it, you could tell the director did have a keen eye, and this apparently was his first theatrical film. At least according to Wikipedia, this was his first theatrical film. All the rest of them are after this, so he might have directed stuff beforehand, but he did a pretty good job. And just as another little thing, the ending also does echo the nuclear thing. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but it kind of does. It's one of those ones that like, oh yeah, now I get it. And maybe it was a little too tired to realize it because I was just reading through the synopsis on Wikipedia at a pause in the recording. It's like, oh yeah, that's part of it too. And it's 88 minutes, so it's not going to waste a lot of your time if you come across it or go in search of it. Definitely worth at least one watch, more so if you're a fan of Japanese cinema. I can honestly say, though, I prefer, as a nuclear weapons metaphor and allegory, I definitely prefer the original Godzilla, because it does handle it in a slightly over-the-top manner, because, you know, it's a giant freaking monster. But it handles the somber tone throughout the film. I think handles the material a little bit better, but it's like a yin and yang with the material, and it's about 20 years apart, so go with that what you will. Rating, I don't know what I'd rate it. Probably take a couple watches to get it, but definitely one of those films worth one watch, and I'm actually pretty glad I watched it. I'm glad he chose this one for mise en scène. He normally would do Blue Velvet, but I know that's probably the overall better film, but this is still a good film to watch for mise en scène.